From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. K-State's Dan O'Brien comments on the recovery in grain prices this week, and he'll take a look at the latest price basis trends at local Kansas delivery points and the current price ratio between corn and wheat, all during Dan's weekly segment on the grain market trends straight ahead. Also today, K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti is back, this time to go over several principles of planting management for grain sorghum, aimed at, of course, improving the potential for maximum yields. He'll focus primarily on seeding rate, plant population targets, and row spacing. And later, with the latest word on the Kansas agricultural weather outlook, K-State's Mary Knapp. Plus more here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You are tuned in to Agriculture Today, and thanks once more for being along with us. Well, the nature of the grain markets very much prone to these gyrations that we've seen for quite some time now, as illustrated again this past week. Speaking with us once more from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas now, is grain market economist Dan O'Brien of K-State Research and Extension. Just when you think these markets are heading bearish for the long pull, the trade yesterday proved otherwise, Dan.
When you look at what the markets have done from a week ago until the action on Thursday, we were down. Well, you look at how much they came up on Thursday, that's about how much they were down for the week. Again, with corn, the July contract came up 40 cents from where it was a week ago Thursday, $6.64. And D's corn up 34.5. So, when you look at what happened in corn futures and combine that with the bids around the state, you see that the cash bids came up to just about where they were a week ago, but the new crop bids came up all of that and about 3 or 4 more cents. So that's indicative of new crop concerns for corn coming into play. And what are those concerns? Well, yes, we got moisture in parts of Kansas, et cetera, but it's other parts of the U.S., parts of Iowa, southern Minnesota, and often the Dakotas. And I'd even say, when you look at drought maps, there are elements in the northern part of the eastern corn belt that aren't doing wonderfully either. So, and of course, forecasts for pretty cold temperatures. I don't know that other than in pockets we'd see freezing, but we're not popping corn out of the ground very well in some of those wet, cold areas, and this just exacerbates the situation. So anyway, you got those factors in play for corn, and add on top of that continuing problems in South America. There's in Brazil and their second corn crop there, so you got that. And for soybeans jumped up 33 cents for the July contract, 15.37. The high on where soybeans were within the last week and a half got up to about 16.60. I mean, the very high would have traded during one day. Most of the time spent about $16, and so we dropped off to 15, bounced back basically to 15.37, 15.35, something like that, and still, tremendous soybean prices. So we have our exports kind of chugging along at a low rate while Brazil's in the front selling, and our planting concerns. Well, as I read the numbers, I think we've done a good job of planting both corn and soybeans in the U.S., but cold temperatures, some of these dry areas are all of concern here for soybeans also. So we saw, again, soybeans, new crop soybeans, $13.78. And I would say new crop forward contract bids for beans in what we put together each week as a list across the state of cash prices, new crop forward contract prices for corn, sorghum, soybeans, and really the upfront price for wheat. We're looking at $12.88 on the low side up to 13.28 for new crop bids for soybeans, new crop bids for corn running, well, depending on where you're at in the state. Again, Garden City at 590 for a new crop bid, Colby 550, every place else, really the lowest new crop bid 526. And those new crop bids, as by my calculations, were, again, just a few cents higher than what they were a week ago. So pretty strong there. And I would say, and we'll get to wheat in just a second, but mixing in the basis patterns we've seen for corn and for sorghum in particular, you've got corn basis probably tied in with rolling off the May contract into July, but we've had about 3-4 weeks now of really strong corn basis here in Kansas at these locations that we're following. And we take some of the best bids in Colby, Garden City, Salina, Hutchinson, Topeka, and Columbus down southeast corner. And boy, almost in lockstep, strong jump up, really strong jump in corn basis. Interesting that sorghum, of course, sorghum had come off such tremendous basis bids earlier in the year, but during this same time, sorghum bids have been pretty much level. I think what it shows, sorghum is marching to the beat of the export markets. Corn's marching to the beat of exports and feed and ethanol. So that's strong, but narrower than the sorghum people would like to have. At demand base, it's right now so strong and so dependent on sorghum, is kind of on Chinese imports of sorghum, I think is sort of showing up in what's happened in the basis between corn and sorghum in the last bit of time.
If we take a look then at wheat basis in Kansas locally, it's impressive because that basis is very much holding the fort as harvest is drawing ever nearer, which is not typical at this time of the year.
You know, our southern Kansas locations haven't missed a beat yet. I think the thing to watch will be here in Kansas when we get that wheat crop in. Our normal pattern when we have a sizable wheat crop is for weakening of the basis, basically to spread storage out to wherever it can go and not all in one location. But as of yet, we've seen level basis. So that's one thing to watch for wheat. I think there's a problem coming in I think it's going to be the June 10th WASDE report in the wheat supply-demand balance sheet, and that's that USDA had projected wheat exports in this old crop marketing year that ends May 31st to be 965 million bushels, and we're probably going to be 30, 40, 50 million bushels less than that. So that means that the USDA's projection, unless something changes really quickly in the next week or so, we get a slug of wheat exports coming in. Hard to see it right now, but anyway, unless that happens, you're probably going to see a weakening of that export number. Again, take that down 40, 50 million. And so whatever we weaken that, assuming everything else is unchanged, then we're going to raise ending stocks, and they're very likely to have a negative signal coming in the wheat market at just about the time when we're starting the wheat harvest. When that happens, I just would encourage people to be wary of what seems to be lining up in the wheat market. It could be bailed out by this exacerbated situation in the corn and feed grain market where we need feed, and wheat's coming in quantity, and that will work against, in the cash market, that'll work against basis having its normal softening during our wheat harvest. But we'll see, and that's going to be more of an issue, I think, out where the feedlots are, and possibly near ethanol plants, mainly feedlots, and that's southwest Kansas, western third of the state, some other parts wherever that feed demand could come in and really help local wheat markets.
And this would be a perfect time to work in a thought or two on those price ratios at the locales around Kansas, comparing wheat to corn in particular here. What are the latest numbers telling us on that front?
Well, got strength in the corn market, and not terrible situation, but not as much strength in the wheat. So right now, on a cash per bushel basis, across the state, we've got wheat prices about 85, 93% range across the state, these locations, wheat of corn per bushel. If you take it back really to a per pound basis, and if you're feeding it, that's where that issue would come. You've got spot cash price per pound at Garden City and Colby out in those western areas. Wheat on a per pound basis is priced at about 80% of that of corn. Even in other locations around the state, the stronger export areas, Salina, Topeka, wheat per pound is 86% of that of corn. So you got to have that going on. Even in Columbus, down there, and that part of the country where, if anything, we've got probably demand pull from off to the southeast into livestock feeding operations. Well, wheat in Columbus is priced at $6.28, corn at $7.13 per bushel. That's 88%. And you take it per pound basis, convert that, it's 82%. So here we keep harping on this thing, and the surprise of it is that the USDA probably is not. They'll be pretty loath to make any major changes in that wheat number until they get the end of June quarterly stocks report in. So you have the June 10th report straddling that, what could be a change to the downside in their wheat export number, and you'll be waiting another month to get full positive news on wheat feeding. It could be coming in that end of June report.
And any quick parting thoughts on what's happening in the soybean trade, Dan?
Well, we're seeing the regular pace of soybean exports in the week ending May 20th, about 10, 11 million bushels, on pace to a little bit lower to meet the USDA's projection for wheat exports, which is tremendous, 2.28 billion bushels. And if anything, we're starting to see sales into the new crop marketing year after September 1st. The thing to remember is on these forward sales, let's say a country comes in and they buy at some level. Well, it's almost like a placeholder because they can get out of those contracts. So if they buy those contracts and then the price goes down, there's nothing that stops them. In fact, we do the same thing under this arrangement. If we bought something at a high price and the price dropped, and then if the markets drop off a ways, we cancel the old contracts, buy back at the new. So the quantity may not have changed, but the selling price probably would be in. It's the same thing that we would do if we were a country that was importing a lot of grain and we had that much flexibility in contracts.
Check out Dan's weekly notes on the grain trades that we've been drawing from today. Those are posted as we speak on the agmanager.info website. Enjoy your holiday weekend, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien is a grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, and our regular Friday guest on Agriculture Today.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects, so avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. We're joined once again today by crop production and cropping systems specialist Ignacio Ciampitti of K-State Research and Extension. Yesterday, Ignacio was along with us to talk about dealing with troubles in corn and soybean production with our wet fields around Kansas of late. But today we'll turn to another row crop that's just now getting started, so to speak, in Kansas. Very light planting to date, but the bulk of the grain sorghum seeding will commence here quite soon now, weather permitting. And Ignacio, what we'd like to do today is go over some of those prime planting management considerations for grain sorghum. And there are certain critical practices that you note affecting yields in sorghum that are managed and handled at this opening point of the season. You might talk about what those are.
Yeah, sorghum is kind of the prime time for the crop. So we can touch base briefly on seeding rates, row spacing. We can talk about planting date, and then probably finish with a little bit on some note on hybrid maturity.
Very good. Let's begin working through those, Ignacio, with the seeding rates and the plant populations. Now, you have examined this diligently in recent years through field trials and come up with some important guidelines on both of those related to the expected rainfall in a given location.
Yeah, we start looking at specifically that is our main factor. I mean, when we're looking at seeding rate, one of the factors that we discuss is about the annual rainfall. And we try to look at basically when we are kind of, think for farmers moving from east to west part of the state. So if we start from irrigated or more than 32 inches, we are talking about trying to go to high seeding rates. We are in many situations around 70,000 plus. And then as we move to 26 inches to 20 inches, and then moving to western Kansas. So we start going from this ideal 70,000 seeds per acre, moving to 50 or 60,000 seeds per acre, and then moving to between 35 and 50, around 20 and 26 inches of annual rainfall. And then when we are moving to less than 20 inches, we are moving really to less than 30. In some situations, we are even moving to 20,000 seeds per acre on dryland environment. So clearly quite different if you look at the different type of environments. And then that's one of the big factors that we use to start looking at seed rate. And we also start thinking about what is the yield potential. So if we are shooting for eastern Kansas, we try to go with something that, okay, we want to shoot for the highest yields possible. That is the goal of that 250 bushel maximum. And then if we are looking at all the opposite side of the state in the dryland environment, so we are talking about, less than 20 inches, so we are talking about probably 100 bushels or less than 100 bushels. Those are the things that we are looking on in terms of seeding rates.
Then you have to consider, by the same token, the expected plant populations, what percentage of those seeds will germinate and create a viable, productive plant, and even working into that, the row spacings you'll go with, right?
Spacing is another factor. When we are looking about the populations, we are looking about row spacing as another factor to take into account. And then within the row spacing, one of the main things that I think that we need to emphasize in many situations, we were collecting data from, I would say, the last 20, 30 years, looking at row spacings, 10 inches, 20 inches, or 30 inches. Many of these were case studies comparing different row spacings. And in many situations, in many of these comparisons, we are seeing that there is not really such a large yield advantage when we compare 10 inches versus 30 inch, or even if we compare a 15 versus a 30 inch row spacing. We truly are seeing more potential yield advantages when we are moving to yield levels that they are more than 100 bushels. Okay, and this is connected to that narrowing rows helps the plant, closing the canopy, intercepting more light early in the season, and making sure that we just get that crop moving much faster. Because that's one of the problems that we tend to see on sorghum is that sometimes the start seems to be too slow. So that's a positive aspect. The second positive aspect that we usually tend to emphasize quite a bit on narrow rows, regardless if you have or not a yield advantage, is the weed control part. So if you look at the weed control, closing that canopy much faster, making sure that we have less light getting to the ground, and making sure that this crop basically is moving faster along on the process and out-competing weeds is a key factor for narrowing rows. It's another basically management that we can use to make sure that the crop can be in a much better situation to out-compete any of the weeds that they come early in the process or even the ones that will come and emerge later in the process. Narrow rows is an excellent strategy. And we have seen very limited situations, to be quite frank, very limited places or scenarios where we are detecting that narrowing rows is not a positive effect.
There might be an odd occasion, though, in extremely low-yielding environments where the conventional 30-inch row spacing would be more advantageous.
Yeah, and in those environments, which is exactly an excellent point, is when we are in extremely drying situations, in those environments that we know that we're starting with really not good resource of water, narrowing rows can be a negative effect because what we do with narrowing rows is we tend to speed up the crop. The roots will increase the water consumption and will increase the root mass. When we get to flowering, when we get to the high demand of water for the crop, is the moment that if we don't have any timely precipitations, the main challenge is that crop is running out of water. And then if we start in a really dry environment, we probably will face an issue. And that will be the main problem that we can face in those very dry situations.
There are other factors to throw in here, though. Planting depth, that doesn't vary too much, does it? There's a pretty hard standard to that, isn't there?
Yeah, when you look at a planting depth, you have different scenarios. I mean, in many situations, if we go late in the season, as we usually go here now, temperature is not a big factor. So the big factor right now is more related to what? Mm-hmm. To the soil moisture. So, and if you look at the soil moisture, I would say that in many situations it's more related to if dry conditions on the top section of the soil, we need to make sure that we go at least for making sure that we place that seed in contact with some moisture. We did have a study that we conducted a couple of years ago showcasing this for farmers, that placing the seeds when temperature was not a limiting factor, when everything went okay, main limiting factor after temperature was soil moisture. We placed the seed and it was not raining for a couple of weeks. That seed is staying there, doesn't do anything. If you place the seed even at 3 inches in contact with soil moisture, although it takes time for that plant to come out and then we have more energy from the seed to get up, we are seeing a benefit. I mean, because we start to see more uniformity. We start to see more plants that are coming up much faster. So that planting depth is becoming a more essential component when we are basically in scenarios of fields where we have more lack of uniformity in terms of basically soil moisture conditions.
And there's one more element to quickly bring in here, and that is, in fact, planting date, Ignacio. We're still very well within the window for success with planting grain sorghum in Kansas, are we not?
Yes, very, very, very timely. I mean, in many situations, our optimal planting window shows to be the first or second week, usually around that time in June. And it usually depends, but it's very, very consistent. If we look at the last summary of the 20, 30 years, we are seeing less variability, so more consistency over years when planting sorghum at that time. If we plant too early, we might put that crop into really high stress situation around flowering time with high temperatures and lack of humidity and lack of rains. If you plant way too late, we are on the opposite side because we put that crop probably into really good flowering conditions, but diminishing the temperature, radiation, and then starting to see potential problems to finish the crop because we might have increased the probability of freeze, and then in many situations that crop that is planting way too late in July or late July, so usually doesn't be able to finish, even if it's a short maturity in many situations, just because we don't have enough days to complete the grain filling. So we need to create some balance. Most of our data shows that kind of June is kind of a really nice sweet spot for planting date.
Well, there is a great deal to piece together here to optimize grain sorghum yields with planting management. And it's all covered, by the way, producers, in a fine article on the topic, Sorghum Management Considerations, Planting Practices, focused in on in the recent Agronomy E-Update newsletter out of K-State. It was posted a week ago, this past Thursday, and you can find it at agronomy.ksu.edu. Here's to our grain sorghum growers getting this stand off to a very good start. Weather cooperating. Ignacio, thanks once again for the input.
Thank you, Eric. As always, it's a pleasure.
He's a crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Ignacio Ciampitti, our guest on this part of Agriculture Today. We'll be back with more for you shortly here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Now on to today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. The USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service says that agency will not challenge a court ruling which vacated a portion of the new swine slaughter inspection system relative to line speeds at hog processing plants. plants. The U.S. District Court for the District of Minnesota issued a 90-day stay to give plants time to adjust, according to the service. During this time, establishments operating under the new system should prepare to revert to a maximum line speed of 1,100 head per hour as of June the 30th. According to the agency, they said they'll work with the establishments to comply with the court's ruling and minimize the disruptions to the supply chain. Those disruptions were cited by the National Pork Producers Council as they called on the USDA to appeal this decision. They pointed to an economic analysis showing the ruling would mean a 2.5% loss in pork packing capacity and an $80 million drop in income for producers. The NPPC also said they'll continue to pursue all avenues on this matter. Canadian dairy tariff rate quotas and their impacts on U.S. imports to that market are at the center of the first-ever dispute to come before a U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement Resolution Panel. The USDA's Rod Bain has more.
Shortly after taking office earlier this year, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack placed this emphasis regarding the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement.
To reinforce our goal and our belief that these agreements need to be enforced to the letter.
With particular focus on Canada, specifically on dairy, as despite agreement within USMCA to improve U.S. dairy access to that market, concerns arose regarding Canadian compliance.
Whether it's wheat, dairy, any other commodity, we want to make sure that the agreement that opens up new market opportunities, that expands market opportunities, is actually implemented in the way it was intended.
Which led to the U.S. Trade Representative's office this week requesting a dispute settlement panel under USMCA to challenge Canada's allocation of dairy tariff rate quotas. The panel is expected to report its findings later this year. Secretary Vilsack says the USTR action helps to ensure Canada fulfills its commitments under USMCA. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The International Grains Council has cut its forecasts for world grain harvest this year thanks to slightly lower levels of corn crops than expected. The intergovernmental body said that grains production for the 2021 season will total 2.2 billion metric tons, 6 million tons less than it was forecasting last month. For the 21-22 season, the IGC raised its forecasts for grains harvest by 5 million tons to a record 2.29 billion tons. Well, another round of local winter wheat variety plot tours is set for next week, hosted by K-State Research and Extension, where you producers can check out the newest and the upcoming wheat varieties and their performance. There's a tour north of Offerley in Edwards County next Tuesday the 1st. That'll be at noon. Also on the 1st, 2 tours in the Lynn Palmer area of northern Clay and southern Washington counties. Those will run concurrently, starting at around 3:30. Also an evening tour south of Larned in Pawnee County, and that'll be on Tuesday. On the second 3 tours in Republic County near Belleville and Munden, the first of those starting at 1 o'clock. And then next Thursday, the third, a wheat tour at 9 o'clock in the morning near Kingman, and tours in Phillips County north of Phillipsburg and north of Stockton will take place as well on the 3rd. You should contact your local extension offices in those locations for the exact directions and for further details on these K-State wheat plot tours around the state. And now it's on to this week's edition of the Kansas Wheat Scoop. Here's Marcia Boswell.
Picture in your mind your favorite wheat foods, a pasta dish, a loaf of warm bread, or a pizza crust. However you like to eat your wheat, the latest dietary guidance and expertise want you to make every bite count, including a mix of whole and refined grain foods in your diet. According to Cindy Falk, Kansas wheat nutrition educator, wheat foods, whether they are whole or refined, are part of a happy and healthy life. Both types of wheat foods give your body quality energy by providing essential nutrients like fiber, vitamin A, and iron. Whole wheat products, which contain the entire seed of the plant, have proven benefits for weight control, reduction in heart disease, and prevention of type 2 diabetes. Enriched or refined flour starts with the flour produced from just the endosperm, one of 3 distinct parts of the seed that contains protein. But some nutrients lost in the milling process are added back to the flour, in addition to fortifying flour with added nutrients like iron and folic acid. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2020 to 2025 recommended whole grains constitute at least half of total grains consumption, with refined grains making up the other half. The guidance also supports consuming enriched grains, especially those fortified with folic acid. The Grain Foods Foundation has outlined the research supporting how this mix of whole and refined grains is important to a healthy lifestyle. Grain Foods Foundation is a joint venture of baking, milling, and allied trade industries committed to nutrition education programming firmly rooted in sound science. The published consensus statement detailed the scientific studies linking greater whole grain intake to nutrition and other health-related benefits. Grain Foods Foundation also outlined the findings of a panel of nutrition experts who discussed the contributions of whole and refined grains to the diet. The panel concluded grain foods contribute nutrient density to the diet, meaning an increased amount of beneficial nutrients in a food product. The panel detailed how fortification and enrichment can help deliver key nutrients to the diet. For example, enriched grains are the top source of folic acid in women of childbearing age and have helped reduce neural tube defect rates by 36%. In 2011, the Centers for Disease Control named folic acid fortification as one of their top 10 public health achievements of the last decade. In the end, whether you are eating cereal, bread, rolls, or tortillas, make sure you include a mix of both whole wheat and refined or enriched foods to stay healthy and happy. Learn more about this research at grainfacts.com/research. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Many thanks, Marcia. Well, by the sound of it, we've open weather for the next day or so, maybe a couple of days, and then it's back to the old rainy routine. Mary Knapp will tell us more about that next on Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, our weekly get-together with K-State Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp, as she brings us the latest word from the Weather Data Library here at K-State on Kansas agricultural weather. And there's no arguing it was an eventful week around the state of Kansas, weather-wise, Mary.
It certainly was. We had our first really big outbreak of severe weather early in the week, where we had a number of tornadoes, as many as 17 reported. They'll have to figure out how many of those were actual individual events versus something reported from multiple locations. Probably the most noteworthy was the one that hit Selden. Fortunately, there were no fatalities with that, but there were a number of minor injuries. And following the tornadic event, as that boundary moved a little bit more towards central and eastern Kansas, we had a number of hail events, some of them with quite big large hail. Yes, very big hail, which of course is not what we need on any of our crops at this particular time, let alone the houses and businesses that were impacted by it. And then you move into the eastern part of the state, and we had high winds and heavy rain with some attendant flooding to go along with that.
And to the moisture, one would have to think the drought is dissipating at a rapid clip as you check the numbers.
Well, as we look at the numbers for the week ending on Tuesday, which is where the drought monitor cutoff occurs, most of the state was wetter than normal. The exception was the north central and central divisions. Of course, those figures don't include the rains that fell after the 7 a.m. on Tuesday into Wednesday and Thursday. But we did see some improvement in the drought monitor. Right now, the only thing left on the map is abnormally dry conditions, and we carved away a little of that in the southeast and removed the last of it out of the northwest. And in fact, the northwest division had the largest percent of normal for the week. They averaged 1.45 inches, which is 173% of normal. The southeast had the highest average precipitation at 2.14 inches, but that's only 163% of normal. So the areas that got it actually got quite a lot. If we look at the year to date, the only part of the state that is still running on the dry side is South Central, and they're averaging 9.83 inches, which is 91% of normal.
But that's not too far off of 100% yet. So.
No, it isn't, and it might be more welcome than the excess moisture that is plaguing other parts of the state, particularly for the summer planted crops. It's been difficult getting into the field, and getting emergence has been really, really tough. While last week was slightly warmer than normal, most of the spring season has been on the cool side, and so we're not getting a whole lot of progress on those spring planted crops.
It's really hard to accumulate those growing degree units when temperatures are this persistently cool.
Right, and it's not just the growing degree units, it's also that the soil temperatures have not been particularly warm, so it's slower to germinate and actually get out where it can take advantage of any sunshine that might develop.
To the outlook, Mary, is there any semblance of a dry stretch for any extended time in that forecast?
Well, when we look at the 7-day quantitative precip forecast, it's not encouraging. Basically, the last one that I saw has the entire state painted in the red, which equates to somewhere between 2 and 4 inches of rain.
Wow.
The fringes are not much drier. There's a little bit on the east where they're looking at 1 to 2 inches of rainfall. But again, that's going to be more than what we need at this time of the year. We look at the 6 to 10, and it favors cooler than normal temperatures and wetter than normal. Move out to the 8 to 14, still favoring that cooler pattern, but it does look like there's a chance for some dryness to develop, mostly in the western third of the state and equal chances in the east.
Considering that, then, the threat of flooding will stick with us for a while.
Right. And there are a number of flood warnings out right now for the existing conditions. Stream flows are very high, and the soils are pretty well saturated. Unfortunately, what we may see is because of these saturated conditions, when a front comes through, you could have storms bubble up and drop quite a bit in a very short period of time, which will increase the chances for flash flooding. And those may be a little bit more difficult to predict because they'll be isolated. It'll just be one storm that builds up over an area and produces that heavy rain and then dissipates. So be on the alert for those kinds of conditions. And, of course, when there's ever water across the roadway, don't try driving through it. Go around. You can't be certain what the roadbed is like underneath that, and we certainly don't need the problems that might bring.
And finally here, anything new in that June outlook as well as the June, July, August forecast?
Well, when we look at the June outlook, it's equal chances on both the temperature and on the precipitation, with a slight tilt towards dry in the west and wet in the east. And the summer outlook for June, July, and August pretty much favors that same pattern, with a slightly larger area of drier than normal in the western part of the state.
We joke about it, but come mid-July, we may well be longing for that moisture.
Well, certainly we would like to have a better distribution on that moisture. As we move into June, for many places, that is their wettest month of the year. But July is still in the thick of our wet season, and it's not till we get into August that we start seeing a decrease in the average precipitation. So at this point, a lot of producers are ready for at least a week of sunny, dry weather so that they can get field work completed.
I have a ton of catching up to do, and always a pleasure. Mary, thanks. Enjoy your holiday weekend.
Thanks, Eric. You as well.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension, right there. We will be away for the Memorial Day holiday on Monday, incidentally, so please rejoin us, if you will, on Tuesday right here. Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good Memorial Day weekend for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.